We're going to spend this next quarter talking about the authority of God. And I hope by the end of the quarter, you're as impressed with the fact that determining how to worship God according to His authority is not an exercise. It is an all-consuming way of life. It is a mindset that completely immerses us. That's how important it is to understand how God wants us to serve Him and how He wants us to worship Him. And that's what we're going to dedicate the next 3 months to, is the discussion of His authority. Now, I need to warn you of a couple of things. We will be looking at a lot of passages that most of you are very familiar with. You've been through them a number of times, and it's just a matter of additional repetition. If you're like me, my brain hears a passage that we've gone through, that I've heard over and over again. It says, okay, I got this, I'm off to something else. So it's easy to get on tangents depending on the passage we're talking about. I would hope you can keep focus on those passages that we look at, because we're going to run into passages where you're going to go, huh? Because it's going to be rather complicated. Or we're going to run into passages where you're going to say, oh yeah, prove it. So if you can follow the thought process, that would help tremendously. Also, I should probably apologize to you up front. I have a way of getting a little too technical for the occasion, and I lose the audience. They're just gone. I used to differentiate equations in n-dimensional space. Now I can't hardly say it. Don't ask me to spell it either. If you want to know how to spell it, talk to Cary. She knows all that stuff. So I kind of get wrapped up in technical things. I will try to avoid that, and if I do, I'll apologize anyway. But we're getting into authority, and I'm going to start with a couple of very familiar examples to most of us. Individuals from the Old Testament that you've heard about and studied many, many times, most of you. Some, maybe the names are brand new to you. But what we're going to talk about is, to begin with, we're going to talk about Nadab, Abihu, Uzzah, and a fourth person, Uzziah. Now, I'm sure you've seen these names many times. Nadab and Abihu, who were they? They were Aaron's sons, probably Aaron's eldest sons, and that's very important. Next question that follows, obviously, is who was Aaron? The first high priest. He was the brother of whom? Moses. He was the brother of Moses. He was Moses' mouthpiece until Moses was confident enough to talk to the people. But that was the role that Aaron played, and Aaron had at least 2 sons, Nadab and Abihu. He actually had more sons, because we know what happened to these 2. Who was Uzzah? Uzzah. Right, but who was he? Who was Uzzah? It's important to know who Uzzah was. Not as much, of course, as what he did, but who was he? Pardon? He was a priest. He was a priest, and when the time that he lived was when David became king, and it was David's idea and desire to move the Ark of God, the Ark of the Covenant, from where it was in a person's residence to Jerusalem. And Uzzah was one of the priests that was involved in that. How about Uzziah? Anybody know who he was? He was one of the kings of Judah. Matter of fact, as a king of Judah, he ruled longer than any other king. He reigned for 52 years. but he was struck with leprosy because of one of the things he did. Now, the good news probably to some is I'm not going to have a lesson sheet. The questions that we're going to discuss are built into the slide program. So my hope is when we get to those questions, someone will say something. Because I don't want to stand up here in the middle of a pregnant pause and try to fill empty air. So please, my plea is when we get to one of those questions that everybody kind of participate. But we have in the case of Nadab and Abihu, in Leviticus, we find in chapter 10, the first 3 verses of chapter 10, it says, "Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans." What was a fire pan used for? Do you remember? To burn what? To burn incense, which was an integral part of worshiping God while they were in the wilderness and they were traveling to the promised land. And so they take their fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Nadab and Abihu were erased. In effect, that's what happened. God erased them. What was the offense, as it says there in that verse? They did what? They offered strange fire. Now, we tend to think most likely what happened was they took the fire or the embers to burn incense. They took the embers from some campfire, some fire that was there, and not from, we assume, from the altar. But we don't know. If you go through the Old Testament, I couldn't find any place where it told the priests where those embers were supposed to come from. Don't know where they come from. We don't know if they came from the wrong place. We don't know how and in what manner Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire. But what do we know for sure? What do we know for sure about what they did? It wasn't right. It was not right what they did. Now, how did it break God's commandment? We don't know. But we know that they knew what the right thing was to do, and they did it wrong. We know that. Now, what specifically they did wrong, we don't know. But what we do know and what we need to know is they did it wrong. And they had the knowledge to what? Do it right. They had the knowledge to do it right. They didn't use it. It says in verse 3, "Then Moses said to Aaron, 'It is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be honored.' So Aaron therefore kept silent." Now, that's a clue to where we're going, that verse. That's telling us what our objective is going to be in this class, for this quarter. Those who are to come near to God in this context, while they're wandering through the wilderness, if they're going to come near, they had to do what? By those who come near me, I will be what? Treated as holy. Treated as holy. And in order to treat in our life and in our service God as holy, what do we need to be doing? Following is what? What he, starts with the C, commanded. If we're going to treat God as holy, we have to do what he has commanded. Period. We have no option. By those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people, I will be honored. Now, we have reached the point where we got a Paul Harvey rest of the story situation here. There is more to do with this particular example that we'll get into, and as we kind of unfold and we look a little deeper. But right now, all we know is they knew what the right thing to do was, and they did it wrong. What was their motive? We don't know. And what specifically they did wrong? We don't know. Going on to 2 Samuel 6, we find out about Uzzah. Uzzah was a priest. Uzzah was a priest while David was king. In verse 1 of 2 Samuel, now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name, the very name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim. What's the name, do you suppose? Jehovah, or in Hebrew, Yahweh. Yahweh. So they recognized that this ark was the ark dedicated to the worship of God. It was the ark of his name, the ark that represented his presence and his protection for the children of Israel. Verse 3, they placed the ark of God on a new cart that they might bring it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, excuse me. I have to have this in my hand. Linus has got his security blanket. I have to have a dry erase marker. Otherwise my tongue doesn't work, my brain quits on me, just all kinds of bad things. They placed the ark of God on a new cart that they might bring it from the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were leading the new cart. Now, if David commissions a new cart to bring the ark of God to Jerusalem, that's just not a new cart. That's not a cart that you go to CarMax and check the lot and find. It's a cart that most likely you go to the Cadillac dealership and say, I want the best. What David did is he prepared the best for moving the ark. And we find that movement was guided by and led by priests, one of which was Uzzah. In chapter 6. Meanwhile, David and all the house were celebrating before the Lord with all kinds of instruments made of fir wood, and with lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nagin, Uzzah reached out toward the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah. Why did the anger of the Lord burn against Uzzah? Could anybody touch it? Yes, they could. Priests could not touch it. And that's where Uzzah messed up. Priests could not touch it. That according to the law of God. But there's more there. There's more that we must consider. Burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there by the ark of God. God erased him. Just like the case of Nadab and Abihu, God erased him. But there's the Paul Harvey rest of the story. There is more to unfold about what transpired. So when he did, what would our society say about what God did? What do you think? Does the action taken by the Lord seem overly harsh? Does it? Would our society say yes or no? They say yes. Randy's lesson this past Sunday, he delved into that a little bit. That is way too harsh for what took place. Uzzah, to reading it, looking at it rather at first hand, just first blush, it looks like what they did is they were caught up in a moment. They were caught up in a moment, they didn't really think, and they acted instinctively, or they acted habitually. They have no excuse. Because what they did, God erased them immediately. He erased them immediately. There is reason there, which we will delve into. How might this be perceived by the current society we live in? Like you said, way too harsh. How could a God who loves do something like that? You're going to have to explain it to me. You're going to have to justify it, because I can't see how that could happen. That's the way people today think. Right. Are those legitimate statements? Are those legitimate statements? I mean, he was preventing it from falling out of the cart. They were caught up in the moment, Nadab and Abihu. Are those legitimate statements? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Because there's a human side to us. Judy. That's one of the factors that's the Paul Harvey part that we have to get into. That's one of the important factors. So don't forget that thought, because I will. So it's a legitimate concern when people say, "How can God be that harsh?" We have to understand why God needed to do that. But he just erased them. And maybe what they did without thinking. But God erased them for it. Yes, Christine.
God erased them, but we still have it written down as the example. It's still written. We're still taught about it. We're still being told about it, even though they were erased.
Why is it important to study these two? Christina, why is it important to study these two events when they worshipped under the old covenant, which has been taken away?
It's an example. God's not playing with you. When he tells you this is the commandment, you have to follow it.
Okay, example of what? What's it an example of? Brett. We need examples like this only if they occurred in the Old Testament, because we need to understand the character of God. James 1:17. Who said, Jackie, would you read James 1:17 for us? And these are Old Testament examples. We don't worship God under the Old Testament anymore. That's true. That's absolutely true. We don't have anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant anymore. We can't even find it. That's true. So why is it necessary that we understand examples like this? You have that, Jackie?
1:17?
Yes.
Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow.
With whom there is no variation. The God that Nadab and Abihu and Uzzah served is what? The same God we serve. What God expected of them, although the particulars may have changed, but the character, the concern, the thought process that he expected of them, he expects of us. Cary.
It's not enough for us to say, well, I wasn't thinking, and that's why we have to study these stories. We can't use the excuse of, well, I wasn't thinking, that's not fair. He's given us everything. It's right there. The directions are right there. So that's an excuse that sounds really silly when you think about it.
What do we hear? The ignorance of the law is what? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. No excuse. There is a law. God has a law. But more importantly, it's understanding God's character. That's what we need to understand. And that's what examples like this is helping us to understand. The character of God, like Brett said in Malachi 3. He does not change. The God of Nadab and Abihu is the God of every member at Rosedale Church of Christ. He does not change. And so it becomes critical that we understand why the things that took place did in fact take place. Let me give you another example. Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26, he was one of the kings of Judah, and he reigned for, like I said, 52 years. It says, and he was a very successful king as well. Not only was he successful, he was very prosperous. The nation of Israel, Judah, prospered considerably under the reign of Uzziah. And here's why. When he became strong, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly, and he was unfaithful to the Lord, his God, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. It says, then Azariah the priest entered after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men. Uzziah had no business being inside the temple. None whatsoever. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he went anyway. Why did he go? Arrogance. Pride. That's why he went in. They opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense." What does it mean to be consecrated? Set apart. Go through a process of sanctification. Go through a process of purification. But it's purification in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of men. What in our eyes purifies us? Something you do almost daily. Take a shower. Take a shower, you know. So that's how we see purification. God sees purification a different way. So the point of serving God is to see life, to see our existence, to see our service, not through our human eyes, but through God's eyes. That's why respect for God's authority is not just an exercise. It is an all-consuming mindset. It is the way we think, and it is the way we act habitually. That's what Nadab and Abihu and Uzzah found out the hard way. They need to think, they need to act habitually. That is, they need to act according to the truth of God without having to think about it. So it becomes a natural inclination. In verse 18, they opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful and will have no honor from the Lord God." Verse 19, but Uzziah, with a censer in his hand for burning incense, was enraged, and while he was enraged with the priest, the leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priest in the house of the Lord, beside the altar of incense. Now, what has always confounded me with respect to this answer that the priest made is that in the case of Nadab and Abihu, what they did, they seemed to be caught up. I've been moving furniture, can't hardly write. Caught up in the moment. With respect to Uzziah, Uzziah caused the moment. So I've always wondered, why didn't God zap Uzziah like he did Nadab, Abihu, and Uzzah? I mean, he erased them immediately. There was no apparent second thought to it. They were gone. And they were just caught up in the moment. In the case of Uzziah, he caused the moment. His arrogance, his pride. When he thought and he determined that he would sacrifice as the priest did, and only as the priest could. That was how blatant can you be with respect to denial of God's authority? Now, why didn't Uzziah get zapped like the other three? Why didn't God just erase him in the moment? I mean, what he did seems to me to be much worse than what the other three did. Much worse. In effect, he did erase Uzziah. When the leprosy broke out, Uzziah was taken out of Jewish society. And the rule of the king the rule of the kingship fell to his son Jotham. In effect, Uzziah was also erased. He was no longer there to that his influence or his example might have influence on the people. Cindy. There's a lot to do with the audience of the moment. Let's go back to Nadab and Abihu. What did I do with, there it is. In the case of Uzziah, it's kind of, it didn't make any difference whether there was 80 priests. He was going to do it, you know. He was going to do it, and no one was going to stop him. Who stopped him? Who stopped Uzziah? God stopped him, because the leprosy broke out. The leprosy broke out on his forehead, which was probably the most visible part of his body at the time. Was his, you know, and was like, well, let's put a billboard up here. And that's what happened. God erased him from Jewish society, because from then on he must stay separate, quarantined, isolated. Never again was he accepted into society, even though he reigned the nation of Judah. In I had my hand. If we go back to Leviticus chapter 8, talks about Moses and Aaron and his sons. Then he presented the second ram, the ram of ordination, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the ram. Moses slaughtered it and took some of its blood and put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. He also had Aaron's sons come near, and Moses put some of the blood on the lobe of their right ear, and on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. Moses then sprinkled the rest of the blood around on the altar. Not being there, we lack comprehension of just how important this act came. By the time this takes place, the tabernacle has been finished. The altar has been finished. They have the large laver where they would wash the animals to be during the process of sacrifice. This, in essence, is one of the first times the tabernacle is actually used. The tabernacle that God gave Moses the pattern, and they constructed it precisely how God told them to do. Now it's ready to be used. They've gone through this process of constructing it, and it's rather complicated. It's not just a tent. It's rather complicated. They constructed the tabernacle. They constructed the furniture according to God's specific plan that went in it. They've constructed the altar. They've constructed, as I said, the laver for washing the sacrifice. They've got everything laid out. And now it comes time for Moses to consecrate Aaron and his sons. This is the inauguration of the Levitical priesthood, is what it amounts to. Now, he has inaugurated the priests and the priesthood, and Aaron being the high priest, and those who would succeed him. This starts the process. This starts 1,500 years of the Levitical priesthood serving God. What was the priest responsible for? What tasks were the priest responsible for? This is evidently they're responsible for sacrificing at the temple, and they're the only ones that can do it. What else? The high priest entered into the Holy of Holies for the sacrifice of atonement. What else were they expected to do? Teach. That was their job, is teach. Teach the people what? How to worship God. Teach them the law of God, God's commandments, how to obey those commandments, what God expected of them. That was probably more important than the sacrifices that were conducted. Consider Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist. Where was he when he was told that he would have a son? He was in the temple. What was he doing? He was offering incense at the altar of incense. And that's when the angel came and spoke to him. Why was he there? Because it was his turn. One of the things that David did is he set up assignments and families and tribes who were in the tribe of Levi, who were scheduled to perform the tasks and the duties of the temple, and it was Zacharias and his family's turn to do that. And it says by lots, Zacharias was chosen to go into the temple and offer incense at the altar of incense. That was his specific duty. But you had to be a priest. You had to be a priest to do that. But more importantly, what was Zacharias expected to do when his family wasn't serving the temple? He was expected to teach. Teach how to obey God. Teach how to follow His commandments. That's what he was expected to do. That became the task of the priests. Now, we find here in Leviticus 8, that's where all of this work and serving God started. When it's kind of an inauguration. They are now chosen, Aaron and his sons, to conduct the sacrifices and also to teach. This is where it starts. Now, who is there? Who else sees this take place or knows that this takes place? Everybody. What Moses did is he called the leaders of all the tribes and all the family groups. He called them elders. And there were literally hundreds of elders who came and were seeing this inauguration take place. Seeing these people, Aaron and his sons, consecrated for the service of the tabernacle. Everybody saw this. Who had to do it right? When it came to serving the temple of God, who had to do it right? These guys. And everybody knew it. These guys had to do it right. Aaron and his sons. That was the responsibility given to him. If anybody did it right, it had to be these. Going on in 2 Samuel. Now we're backing up a chapter. We read some verses from chapter 6. Now we're backing up a chapter to chapter 5. Talk about David. It says, then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. What did they mean by that? Those tribes who came to Hebron, and that's what they said. What did they mean? Your bone and your flesh. We're family. We're family. We're of the same tribe. We're of the same people. We're all the descendants of Abraham. Previously, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and in. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel. So all of the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them before the Lord at Hebron. Then they anointed David king over Israel. This has not happened before. Saul had been king, but Saul had never ever been able to achieve the unity amongst the 12 tribes that David did. He had never been fully recognized by the 12 tribes as David now is. David is truly the first king of Israel. If we talk pragmatically, Saul wasn't able to do it. They remained to a certain extent still fragmented under Saul. But now we have, what did it say? All the elders of all the tribes came to David's coronation. Now, David is king over all the nations. That has never happened before. Who had to do it right? Of everybody in the nation of Israel, who had to do it right? David. David had to do it right. So we're starting to see through God's eyes what is taking place. Those people who dishonored him are the people who most had to do it right. Because now we have an entire nation of Israel looking at David and seeing how he operated. This has never happened before. We have an entire nation of Israel looking at Nadab and Abihu and this as their spiritual leaders, and this has never happened before. And if there was anybody who had to do it right, it had to be, in these instances, these four individuals: Nadab, Abihu, Uzzah, and David. So when Uzzah was erased because he reached up and touched the ark, who's the message for in reality? Who's the message? God sent the message. Who's that message for? For David. It's for David. Uzzah should not have done what he did. He broke the law of God. He disobeyed a commandment. That's a given. But God sent a message, and if anyone in that society needed to hear that message, it was David, because he was visible to everyone. And whose idea was it to bring the ark in an ox cart? David. Remember what he said? What God said to Aaron? Those who come near me, I will be treated as what? Holy. I will be treated as holy. They've got to. The character of God demands it. And if we expect to come close to God, what do we have to do? What's our obligation? Because God's the same character as back then. Our obligation is to treat him as holy. And the equivalent of treating God as holy is to what? Obey his commandments. We got to do it God's way. In Leviticus 9, Moses said, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." So what we have in this part of Leviticus is the very first sacrifice that Aaron, as the high priest, makes for the people. He actually sacrifices on behalf of the people. Moses then said to Aaron, "Come near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, that you may make atonement for yourself and for your people." This is the first time this happens. The tabernacle is finished. The altar is finished. Now they're actually sacrificing, and they're sacrificing for the people. Never happened before. The first. It's absolutely a first. That you may make atonement for yourself and for the people. Then make the offering for the people, that you may make atonement for them, just as the Lord has commanded. So, he makes atonement for it. He makes the sacrifice according to instruction. Going on in chapter 9, then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after making the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. When they came out and blessed the people, so there was quite an audience there, blessed the people, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Can you see how special this moment is? The first sacrifice of atonement for the people, and the presence of God appears to them. I don't know that we could fully understand the excitement, the enthusiasm, the sheer amazement amongst all the people when this occurs. It is a singular event, a singular moment that takes place, because they've started sacrificing. They sacrifice for all the people, and what happens? God is there. His presence is there. Then fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and they fell on their faces. And Nadab and Abihu were there, and what'd they do? They got excited. They grabbed strange fire because they were caught up in the moment, and they were zapped, because they did not obey the commandment of the Lord. So here is a very special event. It's very easy to see how someone there in this environment can get so excited about serving God. and how they can, in their haste and trying to worship and trying to guide the people in the worship, grab the wrong embers and put it in their censer. They were caught up in the moment. Caught up in the moment is not an excuse. Caught up in the moment doesn't mean a thing. In their minds, what was going on? What would you suspect was going on? Do you think they felt right about what they were doing? Absolutely. I'm sure they did. We got to do this. Come here, Nadab, we got to do this. This is a special time, and we got to treat it like a special time, and we've got to do special things for this time. And so they did. And then we get to chapter 10, and there's apt. There's a commentator. His name was Knoebel. And I read this from Kyla and Delitzsch, so I thought, maybe this will... They said it better than I could. It said, Knoebel's opinion is not an improbable one, therefore, that Nadab and Abihu intended to accompany the shouts of the people with an incense offering to the praise and glory of God. So, we think about there it is, where we left the marker. And according to what Knoebel is saying, that we suspect was caught up in the minds of Nadab and Abihu. As it says there, and presented an incense offering not only at intended to accompany the shouts of the people with an incense offering to the praise and glory of God. Do you think that in their mind, their intention was to honor God? Yes. They wanted to honor God. Did they want to glorify God? Yes, they wanted to glorify God. Did they respect the Lord? Did they have respect for Jehovah? Absolutely. If you're going to get the incense, who are you thinking about? Yahweh, Jehovah. So they had respect for God. I mean, by their actions, we can tell that this is probably what was in their heart. All the people there, this is a special moment. We've got to honor God. And that was their intent. And presented an incense offering not only at an improper time, but not prepared from the altar fire, and committed such a sin by this, notice the term that they use, will worship. What is will worship? Pardon? To do it my way. Or this is what I think should be done. What it boils down to, I think this is the right thing to do. Will worship. He says, and committed such a sin by this will worship that they were smitten by the fire which came forth from Jehovah even before their entrance into the holy place, and so died before Jehovah. Now, that's a quote from a commentary. And so we take it with a grain of salt. That's what one man thinks. But it sounds pretty reasonable that that's what they were thinking. That their motive in what they did was to honor God. If it wasn't to honor God, they wouldn't be grabbing fire and putting it in their incense burner. Their motive was to honor God. What was David's motive? What was David's motive to bring the ark to Jerusalem? Who was he thinking about? Think about Jehovah. He was thinking about Jehovah, honoring him, worshiping him. He was thinking about Jehovah. Colossians 2 and verse 20, if you have died with Christ to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourself to decrees such as, do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, which all refer to things destined to perish with use, in accordance with the commandments and teachings of men? These are matters which have, to be sure, the appearance of wisdom in made religion. And self-abasement and severe treatment of the body, but are of no value against fleshly indulgence. What is meant by when Paul says, these are matters which have, to be sure, the appearance of wisdom in self-made religion and self-abasement and severe treatment of the body? What's he saying there?
You're doing it for you, not for God.
Well, they're doing some, I would say they're doing, when they talk about self-abasement and the appearance of wisdom and self-made religion, why would they go to those extents? You think they think they're trying to honor God? Cindy? They're wanting, Mitch. It does. It does that. But fundamental motivation. What's their fundamental motivation? Honor God. Brett. Their fundamental motivation is to honor God. But they're doing it wrong. What are they doing? What's their motive? If we give them the benefit of the doubt, they're honoring God, but what's their motive? They think that's what pleases God. This is their intent, this is their attitude, and they are doing it because they think that pleases God. Self-imposed worship. What would Knoebel call it? Remember we read that quote? Will worship. They're choosing to do it because they think that pleases God. Does it please God? No. These attitudes, these are very commendable attitudes. Are these attitudes we are expected to have? Yes, they are. But if we have this attitude and we don't do it right, what has this attitude done for us? Nothing. Nothing. It didn't help Abihu. It didn't help Nadab. It didn't help Uzzah. It didn't help David. We have to have these motivations. But these motivations without truth become absolutely worthless. And that's what we have to remember. Without the truth of God, John chapter 4, verse 24. Those who worship God in what? Spirit. We got the Spirit, but what are we missing? Truth. Spirit and truth. And is a conjunction. A combining conjunction, which means you have to have both. 4 doesn't equal 4 unless you have 2 twos. Period. Micah. We'll get there. But there's other things to go with it that we have to talk about. That's the point. That's the point we got to understand. That we can have a perfect attitude. These people, they probably spent all day, all of their lives, trying to honor God, but they didn't do it according to truth. So this did not help them. Didn't do a bit of good. This becomes a waste of time. Now, if we have these intentions in addition to following God's truth, now we have everything. But without the truth or without the motives, we have nothing. And we may have the truth, but if we don't have it for the right reasons, we got nothing. You got to have both, and that's what they lacked. I'm dating myself. I'm dating myself now. In the late 70s, anybody remember Debbie Boone? You just dated yourself. Debbie Boone, she made popular a song, "You Light Up My Life." Probably the only one that put her on the charts. And I heard that the other day, and I was impressed with the third stanza. The third stanza is, how can it be wrong when it feels so right? Colossians 2:23. The will worship, the wisdom of their thought. Do you think it felt right to them? Do you think what they did felt right? Most likely they did because they kept doing it. So how can it be wrong? How can it be wrong? This has become the motto of our society. This has become the standard of serving God in our society. How can it be wrong when it feels so right? How can you judge me when what I'm doing feels so right? What are they missing? What's the ingredient that they don't have there when that happens? Starts with the T. Truth. Truth. They're doing what feels right. It feels right, so it's got to be right. It feels right, so it's got to be right. And that's where they're making the mistake. And that's where the tragedy is. James.
Thinking of two different passages. One is in the New Testament where Jesus says, "Not everyone who says, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter into the kingdom of heaven."
Yeah. Micah beat you to that, by the way. Oh, okay. Okay. You get 50% credit, Micah, and you get 50% credit, James.
Oh, thank you. The other one was also, I'm also reminded of Job when God confronts Job's friends and he says, I'm angry at you guys because you have not spoken of me what is right as Job has.
Right.
So, there's always that part in there where
Right.
you have to say they didn't have the truth.
Yep. How it feels is no determination on whether it's right or wrong. That's what it boils down to. And that's how we live. We live that way with our relationship to people, in our society, to family members, whatever it may be. If it feels right, it is right. And if there's one thing we have to remember is, if it feels right and it's not right, we've wasted our time. So on that note, the herd is moving, so we'll continue next week.